Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Welcome to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books. Right here in the live studios in Hythe, Kent, southeast England, just near the English Channel. Today we begin the reading of the Sri Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Now this was not one of Srila Prabhupada's translations or Bhaktivedanta purports, but in the Chaitanya Charitamrita itself, which we just finished reading, Srila Prabhupada made this statement: our Divine Master, anyone who wants to know about the subject matter of devotees, devotional service, and Krishna must read this book. You'll find it in the Adi Leela, chapter 5, text 203, purport. So based on that, we're going to read the Brihad Bhagavatamrita during this. Yes, we're going to read the whole book, cover to cover. It's a big book. It has two parts. We're going to begin part 1 today. And we're going to every day recite the Srimad Bhagavata Mahima Stotram, even though it is not from the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. It is from the Sri Krishna Lila Stava by the same author, glorifying the Bhagavatam, and the Brihad Bhagavatamrita is a kind of summary of the contents of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Not literally, but a masterpiece of explaining all the different topics in the Bhagavatam through a different medium of story, of dialogue, of plot. Okay, big day for all of us. The Srimad Bhagavata Mahima Stotram from Sri Krishna Lila Stava by Srila Sanatana Goswami. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidwandodita Ditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostute. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Man Mahadana Man Nishtaraka Mad Bhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu Saduta Dayin Atini Chochatakara Hanamun Chakada Chinmam Primnarit Kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Sri Brihad Bhagavatamrita of Srila Sanatana Goswami, Volume 1, translated from the original Sanskrit with a summary of the author's Digdarshani commentary by Gopi Paranadhana Das. This book is a humble offering to the disciples and grand disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By staying faithful to his instructions and by his spirit of generosity, they can transform the world. Foreword. This foreword is written by Dr. Joseph T. O'Connell, who has passed away, but he was Professor Emeritus of St. Michael's College, University of Toronto, and he was considered to be the first authority on Gaudiya Vaishnava studies in the world, the academic world. By the way, point of interest, this foreword was so expertly written that we had to do no editing on this at all. Foreword. The Brihad Bhagavatamrita by Sanatana Goswami is a consummate rendering in Sanskrit verse of Vaishnava devotional spirituality as inspired by Krishna Chaitanya, or simply Chaitanya, 1486 to 1534. Analogous in some respects to Dante's Paradiso, and more closely akin to John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, it depicts not one, but two parallel spiritual odysseys. The first is of Narada, the paradigm of the devout Vaishnava sage. The other is of Gopakumar, a simple lad in search of God. The former travels across India and into heavenly realms in search of those devotees, human or divine, to whom God Krishna has been most merciful. In the course of his quest, Narada encounters ever more profound and dedicated embodiments of devotion, bhakti, to Krishna. Each of these deferentially redirects him to others yet more devout and yet more favored by Krishna than themselves. The dialogues and route, subtly interpreted in an extensive auto commentary, are also designed as to instruct, edify, and inspire devout readers or listeners. The lad, Gopakumar, likewise provides the occasion for progressive spiritual discovery as one follows his pilgrimage from one realm to another in search of ever more sublime and quintessential manifestations of the divine. Narada's search culminates in the paradoxical revelation that the Lord's most favored by Narada's search culminates in the paradoxical revelation that the devotees most favored by Krishna, those whose devotion to him is most perfect and intense, are gopis, simple, though divine, cowherd girls, who are in torment when their beloved Krishna is absent from them. Gopakumara's quest leads to the discovery that God Krishna reveals himself most perfectly in the idyllic heavenly realm of Goloka and the terrestrial Vrindavan, where he sports eternally as youthful lover of the gopis and playmate of the cowherd boys. Within the framework of this dual spiritual odyssey and an extensive commentary of Digdarshini, the 16th century author Sanatana Goswami analyzes with delicate nuances and orchestrates in masterly fashion the theology, psychology of loving devotion, prema bhakti, to Krishna as epitomized by Chaitanya. To readers already familiar with the Puranic Hindu pantheon and imagery, and appreciative of the Vaishnava commitment to prema bhakti to God Krishna, the luxuriant transcendental scenes and unrestrained displays of ecstatic devotion need not seem exotic, but the vividness and novelty of many vignettes and the poignant emotional vulnerability of Krishna may evoke surprise and wonder even among seasoned Vaishnava devotees. If, of course, one does not see the point of what Sanatan was doing, one need not read on. But even a reader new to the cosmology, mythology, and theology of Vaishnava devotion, if reasonably patient and attentive, may find in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita and Digdarshini a remarkably incisive, consistent, and revealing exploration of human spirituality and religious psychology. One second. Excuse me. For Vaishnava devotees in the tradition of Chaitanya, the Brihad Bhagavatamrita and its commentary constitute a foundational text of great value. Sanatana Goswami was the most senior of the authoritative scholar devotees deputed by Chaitanya to formulate the appropriate theology of prema bhakti to Krishna. Sanatan's poetic narrative, supplemented by its commentary, is the most thorough and penetrating statement of his theological ideas and spiritual sensibilities. Significantly, I think, this, his most ambitious work, takes the form of narrative and dialogue. Though the Brihad Bhagavatamrita is carefully structured in its organization, it is dramatic and imaginative in its overt form. Though based on the Srimad Bhagavat Purana, of which it aspires to express the essence or nectar, Amrita, it is not in the form of a commentary as such. It is itself a Purana-like tale, which, though composed by Sanatan, is told as if an ancient discourse by King Parikshit to his mother, Uttara. Like a Purana, it presents exemplary personages, memorable incidents, and striking imagery. All of this serves to nourish the reflection and meditation, that is, the smarana, literally remembering, of devout readers or hearers. The content of the text is words, but these are picture words rather than book words. They evoke the experiential base upon which secondary theoretical and practical elaboration may be built. By expressing his own conception of loving devotion to God in the form of the dual odysseys of Narada and Gopakumar, Sanatan was in effect endorsing literary narrative of a poetic and dramatic sort as a preferred means for passing on to subsequent generations the crucial experience, anubhuti, of loving devotion. For devotees of Krishna in the modern world who are not fluent in Sanskrit, access to Sanatan's foundational poem must be translations or paraphrase. There are several in Bengali and Hindi, and perhaps in some other Indian languages. In English, there is a translation of the Brihat Bhagavatamrita by Srimad Bhakti Pragyan Yati Maharaj from the Sri Gaudiya Math, Madras, but none, so far as I know, of the Digdarshani. The present edition includes translations by Gopi Puranadana Das of both the basic poem and its commentary, plus appendices, glossary, etc. This is an extraordinary labor of love. The Brihat Bhagavatamrita alone contains some 2,500 Sanskrit verses, each requiring painstaking care, even when wisely being rendered into idiomatic English prose rather than metrical verse. The commentary is considerably longer, and although in Sanskrit prose, is far from easy to convey in readable, accurate English. Yet the task has been done, and done well, an impressive achievement indeed. When I began to examine the proofs for this book, I was pleased to find that Gopi Puranadana Das's English prose version reads clearly and crisply. Moreover, it conveys the excitement, wonder, and devotion of spiritual discovery that animates Sanatan's own composition. The more I read, the more fascinated I became with Sanatan's novel and brilliant retelling of themes emanating from the Srimad Bhagavat, but developed into much that is not found explicitly in that revered text. Depictions of progressively more intense and intimate modes of loving devotion build to a climax in the remarkable portrayal of Krishna at Dwarka. Depressed and anguished in absence from Radha and the gopis, and restored to normal consciousness only by an artful ruse. The further I read, the less I was conscious that I was reading a translation. So naturally does one unit of the narrative flow into the next. When I did shift to the task of comparing portions of the translation with the Sanskrit, I was pleased to discover that the English prose is indeed very faithful to the Sanskrit original. One might quibble over the choice of certain idiomatic English phrases, but even these convey the basic sense. From the literal meaning of the original, little is left out and very little is added in the passage from Sanskrit to English. Inevitably, of course, some resonance is lost in any transition from poetic verse to prose translation. But fortunately, because the Brihat Bhagavatamrita is mostly narrative and dialogue, it lends itself more readily to prose rendering than would other types of poetic verse. I would like to think that Sanatana Goswami would welcome his modern prose translator as a kindred spirit and an able expositor of his work. the Digdarshani being itself prose, but prose in the peculiar form of Sanskrit textual commentary, presents the translator with a different set of challenges. In size, it is twice the length of the document which it interprets. In form and function, it resembles the complex footnotes of modern scholarship. In orientation, it assumes broadly ranging acquaintance with traditional Vaishnava themes, Sanskrit religious literature, and technical points of devotional aesthetics, theology, and philosophy. Faced with such challenges, many a translator, and if not he or she, then the publisher, would resort to a paraphrase that drastically cuts down the size and simplifies the scholarship of the commentary, and perhaps introduces an ersatz, ideological or rhetorical interpretation in place of the more demanding and sophisticated orientation of the author. Not so the present translator and publisher. Both Gopi Puranadana Das and the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust are to be commended for respecting Sanatan's auto-commentary as it is, in all its bulk and sophistication. The Brihad Bhagavatamrita and Digdarshani together comprise a classic of religious literature whose integrity ought not to be compromised. On a narrow scale, it is a classic in that it is the template for the theology and spiritual psychology that have remained authoritative for the Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition. And though till now scarcely known beyond that tradition and those who study it, it is, or merits being recognized, a classic on a global scale as well. Sanatan Goswami's chef d'oeuvre is a masterful exploration grounded in Vaishnava devotional faith of human spirituality and religious psychology, for the first time being made accessible in its entirety to the English reading world. As the translator acknowledges, the English version of the Digdarshani is a paraphrase, not a line-by-line translation. As such, it does not replace a close reading of the Sanskrit original for scholars equipped to do one. But as the translator points out and illustrates in the appendices, the paraphrasing is largely a matter of arrangement, not of selective excision or augmentation. From the portions of Volume 1 that I have compared closely, it is evident that Gopi Puranadana Das has managed to retain virtually all of the content of the original commentary, though with considerable rearrangement to facilitate reading. Were it his aim to produce a rigorously literal English rendering, some of his paraphrasing of Sanatan's formulations might well have to be revisited, but all things considered, he has done an admirable job of conveying the informational content and spiritual verve of the author, without bowdlerizing or truncating in an idiom ununderstandable. I'll read that again, sorry. But all things considered, he has done an admirable job of conveying the informational content and spiritual verve of the author, without bowdlerizing or truncating in an idiom understandable to patient and attentive, though not necessarily expert, readers. I presume that the level attained in Volume 1 has been maintained through Volumes 2 and 3. There is a special significance to this publication over and above its making accessible to readers of English a Sanskrit classic of spiritual literature. This is the first publication by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust of a major Vaishnava theological text which disciples of the late Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada have accomplished without his immediate presence. It follows the widely disseminated versions of the Bhagavad Gita in many languages in multi-volume translations of the Srimad Bhagavat Purana and the Chaitanya Charitamrita, each of which is accompanied by an elaborate commentary. These prior publications were substantially the work of Prabhupada himself, with certain of his Sanskrit-trained devotees, including Gopi Pranadana Das, serving as apprentices. The appearance of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita thus marks a new phase of textual theological scholarship by members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. They have, as it were, come into their maturity as responsible for faithful transmission of the Chaitanya Vaishnava tradition of Prema Bhakti, loving devotion to God Krishna. What better way to assure fidelity to the words and spirit of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his circle of immediate disciples than to enable devotees and attentive seekers to hear, read, and visualize the foundational texts of those very scholar devotees who had experienced the charismatic presence of Krishna Chaitanya himself. Joseph T. O'Connell, PhD, Professor Emeritus, St. Michael's College, University of Toronto, Research Associate, Oxford Center for Vaishnava and Hindu Studies. Hare Krishna. So this is very high praise of Gopi Pranadana Prabhu and the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust and English editors also. And it shows the acumen that Gopi Pranadana Prabhu and the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust editors and the publishers have achieved. This is a great glorification of Srila Prabhupada, because when disciples of a guru can do such wonderful things, that means that guru is a special, wonderful spiritual master, an especially wonderful spiritual master, a world acharya. Now we'll move on to the author's preface. Preface. The hero's quest for the extraordinary, an ever-recurring theme in literature, reflects the urge of every heart as at its noblest to discover the full possibilities of life. Anyone dissatisfied with the scant potential of mundane existence is naturally stimulated by the prospect of finding, even vicariously, a world of greater liberty. There should be some better place for the soul. Why should happiness be so elusive? And why should confusion and resentment always shroud the mind's eye, making it unable to see clearly what's in front of it? Srila Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Bhagavatamrita is a gem-like example of the quest genre, but different from the sort of commonly encountered in fable and fiction. Narada and Gopakumar, the respective heroes of this book's two parts, are searching for a key to fulfillment much subtler than wealth, influence, mundane love, the fountain of youth, or even the Holy Grail. Narada has vast experience of the cosmos. Gopakumar is illiterate and naive, yet they share the same vision of what is most valuable. What both want is not to conquer or exploit on any level, but to explore the mystery of selfless service. As Narada already knows, and Gopakumar will gradually learn, the superior mode of life they seek is personal and defined by the interplay of those who take part in it, rather than material laws of nature. The cynosure of the spiritual world in which Sanatana Goswami and his protagonists feel at home is one special person, the object of his selfless love, Narada and Gopakumar value above all. Narada follows this special person, Krishna, as the prince of the Yadus, and Gopakumar contemplates him as a young cowherd like himself. Srila Sanatana takes it for granted that Krishna Gopal is supreme, that Krishna is the creator and controller of everything, and leaves the task of proving it to his brother, Rupa Goswami, who later takes it up in his Lagu, smaller, Bhagavatamrita. Here in the Brihad, bigger Bhagavatamrita, the main questions are in whom and in what realm is love for the Supreme Person most intimately known. At first glance, the structure of Brihad Bhagavatamrita may to modern readers seem repetitious, but the plot does have a logic of its own, which it develops the way classic Indian music develops themes, repeating them again and again with subtle embellishments. In part 1, for example, the same thing happens to Narada over and over again. He goes to someone who is supposed to be Krishna's most favored devotee, praises that person, and is rebuked, refuted, and redirected to someone else. Yet in this cyclic repetition, we discern a progress, although not a linear one, aiming at a single point. We learn much more than the simple fact. We learn much more than the simple fact that someone in particular is the greatest lover of God. Yes, the young gopis of Vrindavan are unquestionably Krishna's best devotees. But for neophytes, still addicted to material lust, merely establishing the gopis as a distant ideal is of little practical use, and may even be dangerous. By understanding that to emulate the gopis' perfect devotion is extremely difficult, honest persons might feel frustrated, and the dishonest will imitate anyway and degrade themselves. Therefore, Narada, in his encounters with various devotees, carefully traces out the real foundations and natural progress of pure devotion in a way that readers can follow according to their own spiritual disposition. Unlike the material existence we all know, in which survival depends on our ability to jockey ourselves into better positions than competitors and garner our share of the limited resources for control and enjoyment. On the transcendental plane of love of God, the resources are unlimited, and everyone competes instead to prove that others are better than themselves. This remarkable quality, unknown in material life, is evident even in sincere beginners in devotional practice, whom Narada meets first, the Brahmana of Prayag and the southern king. they and the more and more elevated devotees of Krishna Narada visits, the king of heaven Indra, Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Prahlad, Hanuman, the Pandavas, the Yadus, and Uddhava, deprecate themselves, not from lack of self-esteem, but out of complete honesty, in which they appraise from their own points of view who really has Krishna's mercy. Narada, as an itinerant preacher, is the best person to undertake this survey of devotional attitudes. Not tied down to any particular place or situation, he is accustomed to meeting different ways of seeing things, and he has the good humor to tolerate being rebuffed by every saintly person he tries to glorify. Gopakumar, the main character of the second part of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, is an innocent young cowherd from the vicinity of Krishna's favorite hill, Govardhan. After a mysterious Brahmana initiates him into the 10-syllable Gopal mantra, a yearning to search out Lord Gopal awakens in Gopakumar's heart. Like Narada in part 1, Gopakumar searches throughout the material universes, but he also travels beyond, into the kingdom of God, Vaikuntha, and yet further to the most confidential realms of the kingdom of God, Ayodhya, Dwarka, and Goloka. The final message of the second part of Brihad Bhagavatamrita is the super excellence of Goloka Vrindavan, the personal abode of Krishna, and in his original identity as the darling son of the cowherds and the lover of the gopis. Sri Rupa Goswami, who regarded his elder brother Srila Sanatana Goswami as his spiritual master, I'll read that again. Sri Rupa Goswami, who regarded his elder brother Srila Sanatana as his spiritual master, acknowledged indebtedness to Brihad Bhagavatamrita in his definitive textbook on devotional service, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, 1.4.13, Srimat Prabhu Padam Bojai Sarva Bhagavatamrite, Vyakti Kritasti Gudapi, Bhakti Siddhanta Madhuri. Our Divine Master has revealed in his Bhagavatamrita all the sweet conclusions of devotional philosophy, including its most confidential secrets. This edition of Brihad Bhagavatamrita is not the first English translation of the work, but it is the first attempt to present in English the entirety of the author's own commentary, which he called Digdarshini. This commentary is invaluably helpful for studying Brihad Bhagavatamrita deeply. I have not translated the Digdarshini verbatim, but have given a close paraphrase that includes almost all of Sri Sanatana's points, with a few explanatory additions of my own. Typically, for a Sanskrit scriptural commentary, the Digdarshini includes grammatical and syntactic analysis of the text, which I have incorporated in the translation. The rest of the commentary is also uncongenial to being translated literally, because Sanskrit commentaries are written in a stylized prose, whose meaning is more suitably conveyed in English by careful paraphrase than by literal translation. Readers who would like to see a sample of how my commentary derives from the Digdarshini Tika may refer to page 763 in the appendices. The text I translated comes from the three printed editions, The text I translated comes from three printed editions, those of Puridas Bhakti Shastri Goswami of the Sori Prapanashrama, and Bhakti Sri Rupa Bhagavat Maharaj of the Chaitanya Math. All three editions are printed in the Bengali script and include the Digdarshini commentary. In the Chaitanya Math edition, only for the second part. Sanatana Goswami too wrote his original manuscript in the Bengali alphabet, but we have chosen to print our Sanskrit text in the more vividly known Devanagari. Our proofreaders and I carefully compared the three texts I consulted, one of which, Puridasa's, notes variant readings from two manuscripts, and when different readings arose, I made my own choices of which to use. I found that in each case, the alternative readings almost never made an important difference in meaning, and the commentary and the logic of the text itself helped me choose. For those interested, I have noted in variant readings of Sri Brihad Bhagavatamrita the alternative readings of the editions consulted. Srila Sanatana Goswami in his commentary, and sometimes in the verses of Brihad Bhagavatamrita, cites hundreds of verses from Srimad Bhagavatam and other scriptures, especially various Puranas and the Mahabharata. In several instances, the Bhagavatam verses, as quoted by Srila Sanatana, differ slightly from the text of the Bhagavatam published by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. Again, these differences almost never significantly change the meaning. I have used the author's readings of these verses even when they differ from the BBT version, and have listed the variants in readings of Srimad Bhagavatam verses that differ from the BBT edition. Verses quoted from other Puranas and the Mahabharata, verses quoted from other Puranas and the Mahabharata, I have simply given, as Srila Sanatana presents them, with chapter and verse numbers taken from the Venkateshwara press edition of the Puranas, reprinted by Gnag Publishers and others, and the Pune critical edition of the Mahabharata. The other sources I have consulted are listed in the bibliography. While working on this book, I have had the undeserved good fortune of living in the location of Gopakumar's story, Sri Govardhan, first on the shore of Manasi Ganga, next toward to Srila Sanatana Goswami's Bhajan Kutir, and more recently by the very side of Giriraj at Dhangati. I hope that some flavor of these all-ecstatic holy abodes has penetrated my ignorance and found its way onto these pages. I am only a very imperfect servant of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and his servants. I cannot pretend to have any profound understanding of Srila Sanatana Goswami's revelation of the most sublime spiritual truths. I am also a clumsy writer, only because this book has been expertly edited by my dear godbrothers, Keshava Bharati Prabhu and Jayadvaita Swami, is it now as readable as it is. They have worked hard to turn my crude manuscript into something that does justice to the original text, and for this I will be forever indebted. After dedicating nearly 30 years to the preaching mission of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Keshava Bharati Prabhu has now started an editing career that is already bearing wonderful fruit. Jayadvaita Swami was Srila Prabhupada's own editor and is the one person who best knows the high standards of Bhaktivedanta book publishing. I am confident that anything passing his scrutiny must be acceptable to Srila Prabhupada and his predecessors. I am also very thankful to my wife, Archa Murti, my old friend, Dravida Prabhu, and Srimati Vishaka Priya, for their editorial comments, to Chama Dasi for skillful proofreading, to Durmada Prabhu for assisting in compiling variant readings of the text of Sri Brihat Bhagavatamrita and locating scriptural citations, and to Rasavarshi Prabhu for helpful research. My thanks to our BBT publisher, Brahma Muhurta Prabhu, for his encouragement and commitment, to our production manager, Govinda Madhava Prabhu, to our artist, Dinabandhu Prabhu, and to the other BBT devotees working on the book's production in Sweden and elsewhere. My life belongs to the BBT, and I am grateful to be working under its shelter. My thanks to Purnananda Prabhu, Brahma Muhurta Prabhu, and Madhupati Prabhu for their financial contributions toward the first printing of this book. I pray to the Vaishnava readers of this translation for their blessings and their tolerance of my faults. I want only that Srila Sanatana Goswami, Sri Vrindavan Dham, and undeviating devotion to Sri Sri Radha Mohan, Radha Madana Gopal receive the proper glorification they deserve. Gopi Pranadana Das at Giriraj Govardhan, Sri Nama Navami, April 12th, 2000. So, I'll stop here. It is 8 o'clock and my voice is finished. I hope you can hear what I'm speaking, because right now my voice is not very good. But it will be better tomorrow night, I promise. So this Brihat Bhagavatamrita is the major work of Sanatana Goswami, although he did other very substantial works, including a commentary on the Bhagavatam, on Srimad Bhagavatam. But it's significant because, even more so significant because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spent more time directly instructing Sanatana Goswami than any other person on the earth. He spent 2 whole months, day and night practically, explaining all the subtleties of the Krishna conscious philosophy to Sanatana Goswami. And then he blessed him that all the imports of these scriptures would be revealed to him so that he could write them down perfectly without deviation to the Siddhanta. Another significant point about this Brihat Bhagavatamrita is that the commentary, Digdarshini commentary, which is very elaborate, as we heard from Professor O'Connell, is the only commentary by the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan of a verse-by-verse commentary of one of their own works. Therefore it is called an auto commentary, a commentary on the author's own work, a commentary by the author on his own work. So for this reason, we have a tremendously authentic and pure transcendental literature, which some of my esteemed godbrothers who are very literateurs call the gold standard when it comes to English. It highlights the glory of Srila Prabhupada to have picked up disciples from the Western world who had no experience in the culture, science of Krishna consciousness, Vedic culture, and turned them into exalted devotees. Gopi Pranadana Prabhu is very, very special. I witnessed it myself as I assisted him in Ajayadvaita Maharaj in editing, the first edit, and great scholars in India recognize Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu's profundity. Profundity is knowledge of Sanskrit, the culture, the philosophy, everything pertaining to the Bhagavad culture. So we're going to stop here. It's a little after 8 o'clock. Tomorrow we will start from the little essay written by Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu on the life of Srila Sanatan Goswami. Hare Krishna. Om Tat Sat. Shri Bihad Bhagavatamrita ki jai. Shri Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu ki jai. Or Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. So any comments? Or reflections? I'm really a little concerned that the phrasing was done properly, clearly in my reading, because tonight I'm struggling, my voice.
Okay. Vilas Manjari Dasi says, Jai Brihad Bhagavatamrita.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for that.
Rati Manjari says, nice to recite that beautiful prayer again.
Yes, yes, we'll hear it every day.
From Sudevi Dasi, she says, Maharaj, Hare Krishna, please accept my obeisances. Glories to Srila Prabhupada's books read by your pure heart. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, thank you. As Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami repeatedly said at the end of our reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita, that he worships the readers and the hearers.
A comment from Yadutama.
Yes, Yudutama.
He says, Hare Krishna Gurudev, please accept my humble obeisances and all glories to Prabhupada. Really excited to embark on this next journey with you and all of the devotees. This may be a bit of a broad question, but could you tell us a little about Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu's relationship with Srila Prabhupada?
I don't know anything about Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu's relationship with Srila Prabhupada. That's a deep subject that has to do with between Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu and Prabhupada. Who am I to comment on his relationship with Prabhupada, a lowly soul like myself? I do know that he was the top Sanskrit editor and that Prabhupada had faith in him. And Jayadvaita Maharaj had faith in him, and all the BBT trustees had full faith in him. And I, as a person who worked with him for 7 years actually, had full faith in him. And when he left his body so tragically, I fell to pieces. Srila Prabhupada's, Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu's relationship with Srila Prabhupada was one of full faith, full loyalty. To my knowledge, he is the only Sanskrit scholar who never went outside of Srila Prabhupada's teachings. He never went to hear from other so-called elevated scholars in India from different traditions, as many have done, and then have gone away from Krishna consciousness as a result. He never translated anything that he didn't understand. And believe me, there are translators who translate things that they don't fully understand, believe me. I think there was one paragraph that he was having a lot of trouble with, and he waited and waited and waited, and finally he went to what he heard to be one of the greatest Sanskrit scholars in India. I forget where it was, maybe it was in Prayag, Varanasi, or Varanasi. And the scholar was also having trouble with the same paragraph. So then Gopi said, okay, that was Krishna. So he went back to Govardhan and he waited until he understood it, and then he translated it. Such an honest scholar in this field is extremely rare. Extremely rare. I can only think that these devotees were attracted to Srila Prabhupada naturally, spontaneously from previous lifetimes' experience of devotional service, and in some cases probably with Srila Prabhupada personally. That's who Gopi Puranadana Prabhu was. He was respected by everyone that I know in the movement. And these days, it's very difficult to find a person who is respected by everyone. The only person, only other person I knew who was so widely respected by everyone was Jayananda Prabhu, who I had the good fortune of living with in the same house for a couple of years, just after I joined Krishna Consciousness Movement. Hare Krishna.
Next is from Bhaktaben.
Haribol Bhaktaben.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. Very excited to embark on this journey around the universe with you. I always wondered what the Brihad Bhagavatamrita was about exactly. Tonight's reading feels like a real education.
Yes, it was a real education, because not only was Dr. O'Connell the most highly respected scholar of Gaudiya Vaishnava literature and tradition in the academic world, but he was also, as you can tell by the foreword, himself a devotee. He wasn't officially an initiated devotee of ISKCON, but he was so favorable, and he understood the nuances of Krishna consciousness properly, better than any scholar, and probably better than a lot of devotees, frankly. I remember when I sent the manuscript to him for him to look at and read, to do that foreword, it was just a real pleasure to interact with him. Great pleasure. Hare Krishna.
Next is from Gauranga Gopal Das.
Mm.
He says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for reading this other great classic of our Vaishnava literature. This translating and editing work seems to me to be such a hard task, almost materially impossible. But, quote, impossible is a word that only appears in a fool's dictionary, unquote, as we heard before.
From Prabhupada, that's right.
From Gopi Chandra Devi Dasi.
Oh, Gopi Chandra, Hare Krishna, welcome back.
She says, Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is wonderful. I'm so happy to be reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita, your servant.
Well, I'm happy that you can hear this also. And that foreword in particular was very deep and intellectually satisfying, at least to me. I hope to you also. and I know that you're intelligent, so you appreciate that. The depth of his understanding and comprehension of the text. To write that kind of foreword, you have to really understand the text. So yes, this is a great honor, privilege to be able to hear this transcendental literature that Prabhupada told us we must read, finally, from the through the translation that follows in his line. And this is what's so important about the BBT literatures. They all follow in Srila Prabhupada's line. They're all faithful to his conclusions and his mood of devotional service. And therefore, we are very, very fortunate to have had Gopi Pranananda Prabhu as one of my best friends, deepest friends. He came out to Govardhan to live. You know, he was living in Vrindavan, but there was not much association there. So I would go into Vrindavan sometimes and we'd see each other and associate. It was so sweet. And then he asked if I could come out, if he could come out to live in Govardhan. And I said, of course, it's our blessing on us. And I helped him find a house not far from our Govardhan ashram, the ISKCON Bhaktivedanta ashram in Govardhan. And we developed a very deep, very sweet, loving personal relationship and working relationship. And yes, Hare Krishna.
Something from Vilas Manjari Dasi.
Hare Krishna, Vilas Manjari.
She says, Dear Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. I am so looking forward to hearing this book from you. I have a question. If Foreword describes the text as a Purana-like tale, could you clarify, does this mean it is fictional and draws on the teachings and history of the Bhagavatam to present the imports of the scriptures?
No, according to the text itself, and we have no reason other than to accept Sanatana Goswami's words. We'll hear about this in the first chapter. But this scripture was one of the literatures that were lost in the oblivion of time. It was the appendix to Jaimini's version of the Mahabharata. There's more than one version of the Mahabharata. Dvaipayana Vyasadev's version was the main one that we know about, but there were other versions of the Mahabharata, the greater history of India. One of them was Jaimini. And this Brihad Bhagavatamrita was, like an appendix to his Mahabharata, just as the Harivangsha was the appendix of Vyasadev's Mahabharata. So it's an actual literature that Sanatana Goswami brought out of the ether by the power of his meditation. It's actually a historical event that Parikshit Maharaj heard from Shukadev Goswami, and in between the time that Shukadev Goswami finished speaking the Bhagavatam, there was some time before the snake bird came, and Agastya Muni, or somebody, Agastya Muni, it was one of the great munis, tried to divert the snake bird, who had changed himself into a form of a Brahmana. And he was approaching, and he was distracted for some time. And during that time, Uttara, the mother of Maharaj Parikshit, approached Maharaj Parikshit and asked him what he had said. So because there was no time to repeat what he had said, Parikshit Maharaj recited the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the essence of the Bhagavatam. It's not exactly a summary of the Bhagavatam in terms of the same people and same events, summarized and made smaller. But it's exactly according to the Siddhanta of the Bhagavatam, spoken by Parikshit Maharaj to Uttara, his mother, when she very sincerely and inquisitively begged her son, who she knew was going to leave very soon, and he felt, out of love, obliged to speak the Brihad Bhagavatamrita to her. That is the historical event. And we hear this from Sanatana Goswami, from his own words, in the text and commentary of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, and we have no reason or other evidence to the contrary. So we accept what Sanatana Goswami says because of his authority. Hare Krishna.
From Rati Manjari. She says, Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you for taking us on yet another transcendental spiritual discovery journey. To hear this book, which you have spent years editing carefully, being read from your lips, is a great treasure.
I was just the peon. I was watching masters at work, Gopi Puranadana Babu and Jayadvaita Swami.
From Vamsi Vilas Das.
Yes, Bangsi Vilas?
Vamsi Vilasi Das.
Bangsi Vilasi Das.
He says, Dear Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I apologize for missing your entire reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Whilst many of my friends were benefiting greatly from your association, I was tasting the bitter fruits of separatism, overly attached to taking rest early. Today in a lecture, my Gurudev, His Holiness Devamrita Swami, mentioned you by name as having edited this book, which confirmed to me that if I didn't hear Brihad Bhagavatamrita from you, I would not forgive myself for 1,000,000 lives. I hope you will accept me as a tag-along. My elder brother, Anadi Kaishora Das, who is a brahmachari in New Zealand, has conveniently just started reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita himself, and is also joining the assembly.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice.
I am always interested to hear Joseph T. O'Connell's wonderfully illuminated introduction, and I wonder how could someone who doesn't seem to be a practicing devotee have such lucid, sagacious understanding and appreciation of Brihad Bhagavatamrita.
Because he was a devotee. He is a devotee. He was associating regularly with the devotees of ISKCON. He met Srila Prabhupada. He personally met Srila Prabhupada. It's there, and I don't remember exactly what the date was, but he met him at least once, maybe more than once. So he got from Prabhupada. He heard from Prabhupada and he accepted Prabhupada for who he is. And he associated with ISKCON and with the devotees of ISKCON ever since then, until he passed away. So he was not an ordinary scholar, not an ordinary person. He was a devotee. You can hear it in the foreword. I have to take some credit for that because another person brought an idea for another Bengali scholar who was also very favorable and very good, but his English wasn't anything close to what he could have done. So I objected, and I said we should have Joseph O'Connell do this, because I had heard about him and read some of his stuff, and it was accepted. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone. Sri Brihat Bhagavatamrita ki jai. Srila Sanatan Goswami Prabhupada ki jai. Samabheda Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. See you tomorrow night, same place, same time, same subject. We'll hear the preface written by Gopi Purananda Prabhu of the life of Sanatan Goswami, and then we will begin the text. Hare Krishna. Hari Bo.